Well, it's 3 after, so I'm going to go ahead and get us going here. Like I said before, we've had a few people who's not able to be here today, but I think I see one or two new faces. So what I'd like to do is get a quick group introduction of the transportation group here, so that our keynote speaker knows who his audience is. And I'll start. My name is Greg York. I'm with SPIL, and the acting chair, Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Blair. I'm also with SPIL, and I am the acting co-chair.
Diana.
I'm Diana Clanton. I work for SPIL out of Sedan.
I'll jump in. My name is Adam Burnett. I'm with the Resource Center for Independent Living, RCIL. I'm here in the Osage office, and I'll let our new ILS in Emporia, Suzanne, introduce herself. Suzanne, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Jan from Emporia at the RCIL office.
Good to see you, Suzanne.
I'm Michelle Walker. I'm with Three Rivers, and I'm based in the Atchison office. I cover Atchison, Brown, and Donovan counties.
Hi, Michelle.
I'm Keena Steinbrock. I work for Three Rivers. I'm an independent living specialist, and I cover Clay County, Marshall County, and Washington County.
Hi, Keena.
I'm Tammy Fuhr, and I'm with Prairie Independent Living Resource Center out of Hutchinson, and I work with our older blind population.
Hi, Tammy. Is that everybody? Has everyone introduced themselves?
Yeah, I'm Harley with the Independent Living Resource Center in Wichita. I'm the Independent Living Service Manager, and we cover Sedgwick and Sumner County.
Hi, Harley. I have an announcement. I'm stepping down as the chair. I have some new responsibilities at SPIL, and my plate is beyond full. And so something had to give. I'm leaving us in good hands, though. I'd like to announce Christina as now the chair, and I'm going to hand it over to her. Christina.
All right, thank you, Greg. I appreciate your confidence in me, and I hope to do the group be really good for the group. If anybody has any questions or if they ever need to reach out to me, you guys have my email. And I do want to introduce that we also now have a new co-chair. Miss Diana Clanton has agreed to step into my old position as co-chair and help me out, and I greatly appreciate that. So Diana, thank you for that. And I guess we'll go ahead and jump in to get started. Today we have Peter Johnke here, and I wanted to introduce and give you a little bit about him. Peter, having been born with a visual disability and then later in life dealing with hearing loss, Peter's no stranger to the world of someone with a disability. He joined the disability movement in 1990 after moving to Vermont, and he began working for the Vermont Center for Independent Living. Peter started in the field of information and referral before working his way up to his current position of deputy director about 5 years ago. Peter is currently the chair of the Nickel Transportation Subcommittee, as well as a representative for the disability community with the Vermont Public Transit Advisory Council. Peter participates in many state and local transportation projects, And on the national level, he participates in a variety of transportation advocacy groups, including Air Carrier Amendments Act Working Group, or ACAA, We Will Ride, Amtrak, and Disability Advocates. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Peter. Peter, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Christine, and thank you, Greg. I think you reached out as well. Happy to be here. If somebody else can help me with if somebody raises a hand or something, because I won't necessarily see those, just jump in. I'm going to be fairly informal here. I did ask Christine to send out the essence of my presentation in large part because it has a lot of links to it. And I'm terrible with collecting links and things out of chat. So I thought this might be more helpful to people. I don't know if all of you know about Nickel, but Nickel is the oldest and longest running disability organizations run by people with disabilities. And it represents, thousands of people and organizations, including Silks and independent living centers and individuals. For any of you who do not know, you can be an individual member of Nickel, even if you aren't associated with a SIL or a Silk. Membership is only $35, and even if that is a financial burden for somebody, that can be waived. So it's really easy to be part of this and to know what's going on the national level. The transportation subcommittee, as we call it, which I chair, is part of a broader Nickel legislative and advocacy committee. So the legislative and advocacy committee is made up of a whole variety of subcommittees, and from housing to Rehabilitation Act to civil rights. I can't even think of all of them right now off the top of my head, but those are all on the Nickel website, which is just ncil.org. So if anybody's interested, please jump in there. If you see a committee that you're interested in, you can make that request on the website, and then one of the staff will reach out to the chairperson and say, hey, this person's interested, and your chairperson will reach out to you and tell you, when the meetings are for I have it on here, but the transportation subcommittee meets the fourth Monday of odd numbered months at 11 a.m. Eastern rather. So I guess that would be 10 a.m. Central Time. So then the transportation subcommittee, to be specific, really looks at a variety of things. The key things right now that we are focusing on are air travel, some issues around medical transportation, as well as we do some, as Christine mentioned, we do some things with Amtrak, and also it's also sort of a continuing battle to deal with Lyft and Uber and other ride-hailing services to provide more wheelchair accessible vehicles, sometimes referred to as WAVE. And it's really crucial that for people with disabilities, they really need to be involved in all parts of transportation. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward that transportation affects just across the board in our lives, from work to education to recreation. I mean, if you don't have accessible transportation, I mean, you can't even go and visit a friend. I mean, this was a big issue that came up, obviously during COVID. There was a lot of problems with some transportation at that time. And of course, people didn't necessarily want to go out at the time, but it created some huge issues around isolation. And now there's fairly good evidence that things like isolation have even greater impacts on somebody's health than, some of the things we chronically think about as health issues like smoking and other kinds of stresses, but just being isolated is really, really a big issue. So I want to talk a little bit about air travel, because that's really something that's right now a fairly hot topic, if you will, especially on the national level. On March 24th, the Department of Transportation held a public listening session around air travel, specifically for people in wheelchairs, which has really become quite dangerous. Some of you may have your own personal experience with horror stories, and there were lots of people who submitted written testimony, and there were people who also submitted they were on the call, oral testimony about just the horrors of trying to navigate air travel when you're in a wheelchair. Besides dangerous for the people themselves, it's also very dangerous for their equipment. Many people frequently have broken wheelchairs or other issues to deal with. So it's a huge problem. One of the people who's spearheading a lot of work around air travel with people with disabilities is the, excuse me, it'll come to me in a minute. The veterans work, American, is it Americans Veterans Association? Yeah, I think so. They've done a lot of work around that. PVA, I'm sorry, they've done a lot of work around veteran issues. When they have a conference, especially when they're now going back to having in-person conferences, they know the issue of broken wheelchairs is so huge that they have at their conference site a wheelchair repair clinic. I mean, they set it up ahead of time because they know people are going to arrive with broken wheelchairs. And so they set it up, and that's really a sad state of affairs. Fortunately, we've had some good things happening here to improve things, and this listening session was one of them. Lots of testimony was there. I think I have in what I sent, there is a link, and I think comments are still being taken till a little bit later this month in April. So if you have written comments you want to do, the listening session I think was also archived, so you should be able to find that as well. And the former executive director of Nickel, Kelly Buckland, he is now working as a disability policy analyst for the Department of Transportation. So that has been a really big plus in trying to get some of these things moving that we've been asking for a long time. We recently had a Region 1 conference, which Vermont is part of, and we were fortunate to have Congressman Langevin on that call. And he's from Rhode Island, and Rhode Island is also part of that. And he is one of the sponsors of the Air Carriers Amendments Act. And this act, it gets introduced every year, and we've really struggled to get it pushed through Congress. The big things it would do is provide a sort of a Bill of Rights for air travelers with disabilities. And it would also give person rights to action in terms of, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, if you've been discriminated against, you can file a complaint with the Department of Justice, and if they don't want to take up the issue, then they'll send you a letter and you can actually go to court, take them to court yourself. You don't have that right in air travel. And that bill would also change some of that to give you that right. So there's a lot of things going on in air travel. There's still a lot to do. One of the members on the subcommittee, the transportation subcommittee, pointed out he lives in a small town, and so they have small planes, and so they don't have jetways. And again, so this creates another barrier for people with mobility impairments to travel on by air. So trying to get some things there that need to be done too. So it's an ongoing battle, but we are making some slow progress in some areas. I'm going to stop there for a minute in case anybody has any questions just about air travel in particular that I might be able to answer before I go on. Okay. So I mentioned ride hailing services. And these are services like Uber and Lyft. You know, in some of the major cities, they do have a few wheelchair accessible vehicles that they can use for people who need wheelchairs, but they're in very short supply and often aren't available at all. And the ride hailing services typically say they don't have to accommodate people with disabilities because they're not providing a transportation service. They're just a technology company that provides the technology, and they're not responsible for the transportation itself, which in my mind is ludicrous. And so they have been taken to court, some locally, some nationally. I think there was on the state level in New York, a ruling against them where they are now having to provide a certain amount of wheelchair accessible vehicles, but they've really made a concerted effort to just do what's absolutely minimally available, minimally required. So they're in compliance with what's required in New York and not making any effort to expand those services at all. There are some improvements in some places where some transportation providers have contracted with those services to provide either elderly and disabled transportation services or Medicaid transportation. And so in those situations, there is some availability for that kind of trips. But again, those are limited to people who just need Medicaid travel. And so they're not open to, you know, general public kinds of things. So that's the thing we're also working on recently in also another New York case. Nickel did file an amicus brief with the court saying that this should be a class action suit. And so that's pending now before the judge. And so we're watching that one closely as well. So there are a number of issues around that issue. And I mentioned Medicaid. And so all of you are also familiar with non-emergency Medicaid transportation, or NEMT as it's referred to. This has also some serious things that need to be worked on. A lot of times there's problems with crossing county lines. I don't know if that's an issue in Kansas or not. Fortunately, it's not an issue in Vermont, but I think that's primarily because Vermont is such a small state. A lot of people, if they couldn't cross a county line, they wouldn't be able to get to their primary care physician at all because they're in a different county. So we haven't had a big issue there. Transportation across the state to get from, you know, one area to, you know, the northern area part of the state to the southern part of the state is definitely more difficult. And those are things we're trying to also improve here. So I don't know if people have run into that situation or have found any ways to do some workarounds or advocating to get that changed. I think in Vermont, Medicaid has said if you have to travel more than 60 miles, you need to get a waiver to go to your doctor. And that frequently happens in Vermont because sometimes doctors are, especially specialists, are definitely further than 60 miles away. And then Medicaid will pay for those trips that are longer and may cross several counties. The other thing that's a big problem with Medicaid, also especially in rural areas, with the lack of access to nearby groceries and those kinds of things. And we had a situation here in Vermont, and we were still trying to sort of work to get this changed. It hasn't yet, but I'll just give you the exact story because it really illustrates the problem. So Medicaid will allow, if you go to a doctor and the doctor gives you a prescription, will allow you to, for that trip to include going to the pharmacy. So this individual, their pharmacy was at Walmart, and they live way out of town and don't have any transportation. And so while they were at Walmart and picked up their prescription, they also picked up a gallon of milk. And Medicaid threw a fit and wasn't going to reimburse the transit provider for the trip. And so that's still a restriction that's in place, and it's ridiculous again. And I think that may be something we have to work on the congressional level to change, because it doesn't make any sense for, I mean, in my mind, Medicaid in the long run is going to end up paying for more money because people are going to be in ill health because they can't get things that they need, good food that's going to impact their health. So it just becomes a sort of a spiral that should and could be avoided. Anything on ride hailing services and Medicaid transportation along those lines? Anybody have any questions or thoughts or things to share?
Yeah, Peter, I am amazed at the restriction over milk, and that the hailing companies feel like they're not providing a service. That to me also is quite ludicrous. That's a little like a restaurant saying we don't have to make our restaurant accessible because all we're doing is providing food.
Oh, I agree completely. That's a great analogy. I love that. But no, it's true. It's a constant battle.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Could you do me a big favor and
Sure.
kind of keep us apprised of the progress of those cases that are in court now?
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome.
What I can do is I have a whole list of people who are interested in transportation, so I will make sure I put you on that list.
Thank you, Peter.
Sure. Anyone else? Some other things of interest that we're looking at. I put this. There is a big conference coming up in September, the 12th to the 16th, that may be of interest to people. There also, going back to Medicaid, there also is a series of webinars that occurred on different topics, and there's one left, which is actually tomorrow. So I don't know if people have ability to put that in their schedule, but they're actually working on coverage of transportation for services that are not provided by Medicaid. So I'm going to try to jump in on that one and see what they have to say about there. But yeah, I will make a point. I mean, I also, besides just keeping tabs on these kinds of things, to my list of people who are not only just on the transportation committee, but people who are interested in transportation in general, I will make sure that I send to Greg, and I can definitely send it to Christine, and she can distribute them to the rest of the group.
Yes, thank you.
The other thing I mentioned, autonomous vehicles. There's sort of the talk on that's kind of died down a bit. It was sort of a hot topic before the pandemic, maybe a year or 2 years before that. And again, the disability community was really feeling like, hey, you're thinking about access and accessibility after the thought. And, we're tired of that. That's the way it always happens. It always becomes more expensive when that happens. And so AAPD, the Association of Americans with Persons with Disabilities, formed a group called We Will Ride. and they're really pushing manufacturers to look at, when they're designing autonomous vehicles, to look at accessibility from the get-go. And we've had some success in doing that. There's a company out in California called Cruise that has been testing some of their vehicles they do right now. They're doing like deliveries using some of those. Some of those actually are with drivers, and now they're actually using them that are autonomous. I don't know if anybody caught this morning on National Public Radio, they have these little vignettes, and the police officer in California, I don't remember which city, I want to say San Diego, but I'm not sure, was a little surprised when he stopped this vehicle for not having, for a brake light being out, and was surprised that there was no driver in the car. You know, they're coming, and it's just a matter of us advocating to make sure that people with disabilities get what they need. And we're not only looking at this from just access in terms of mobility, but access in terms of people who are blind, people who have cognitive disabilities, just in any way that will impact somebody with a disability. And so there are absolutely no barriers to somebody using this, because when there was the first talk about this, they said, oh, how great this is going to be for all these people who don't have driver's licenses and, you know, people with disabilities. And, you know, you and I know it's not going to be great unless they figure it out from the beginning rather than after the fact. So it is something that we're slowly working on. I'm part of this We Will Ride group representing Nickel on that group as well. And we tend to, I mean, these are sort of the broad things that are always coming up, always in the news. During our meetings, I like to focus on local issues. So if people have some things going on and they need some help and, you know, how to advocate for this or that or the other, that may not be a national thing, but might be a more of a local thing, we can strategize around some of those things as well, because, you know, every state is different in terms of how things are implemented. I consider myself very fortunate to be in Vermont. Vermont probably has the highest per capita amount of money put into public transportation. They use some highway funds. The highway transit system has allowed them to use some highway funds to put those into public transit. So we've been able to boost our public transit quite a bit in that regard. Also, as I said, there is by statute, there is this Public Transit Advisory Council, which had a seat to represent people with disabilities. The Vermont Center for Independent Living is in that statute, and so I sit in that seat. There's people from the Council on Aging, there's people from the other disability groups, from blind groups, legislators are on that council. And so we meet regularly, and it's, again, being a small state, it's great because I'm on first name basis with the program manager for public transit in Vermont. His name's Ross McDonald, and I can pick up the phone and say, hey, Ross, I have an idea, or hey, Ross, we have a problem. And I realize, you know, that's a luxury that a lot of other people in states don't have. So I'm fortunate in that regard. So that's all I have formally to say. I'm happy to have discussions and field any questions, or people want to share their thoughts, or you know, what's going on in their areas, different issues that have come up that for everybody in different parts of the state. I don't know a lot about Kansas. I mean, parts of it are very rural, I know, and parts of it are quite populated as well. So you have a mix of things. One thing we just started in, right in the area where I live, in the capital, in Montpelier. Well, I live about 30 minutes outside Montpelier, of which there is no transportation to where I live. So I do a multimodal transit to get to work every day, which usually consists of, more days than not, usually consists of a ride share with my neighbor to where he works, to where I can catch a regular transit bus to downtown Montpelier, the transit station, and then I can walk to my office. And then I do the reverse going home. When it gets warmer, I can take my electric bike and take that to a stop where the bus comes and put my bike on the bus and ride into town as well. Most of you know Vermont's fairly mountainous and hilly, so I sort of did a pre-run with the same neighbor in a car. We figured out there's a way to actually go from my house all the way into Montpelier, staying off any main highways for safety reasons. And going to my office would be quite easy because it's virtually all downhill. Getting home would be really hard, even with an electric bike, because it's all uphill. So I can ride into work all the way on my bike and then hop on the bus and just do the last 3 miles on the bike to get home. So I'm always looking at stuff. I've even asked one of my colleagues here recently, she's from New York and she had to take a ferry. And I said, hey, Linda, is the ferry accessible? She thought about it for a minute. She's, yeah, I think it is. Maybe not the very upper deck, but they had an elevator. So I was surprised. But it tells me that slowly but surely we're making progress. Any questions, any thoughts? Well, I hope this was helpful to everybody. I hope you got some things out of this and can take advantage of some of the links that I've sent out in my presentation. And I will definitely add Christina and Greg to the list so they keep getting information about what's going on with the nickel and other transportation issues. And certainly if anybody, something pops up in your area and you aren't sure what to do or want me to bring it to the Nickel Transportation Committee and find out if it's something that should be worked on nationally, please reach out to me. My contact information is at the very end of the attachment, and I'm happy to discuss things further with you.
Thank you for that, Peter, and thank you for sharing all that information. It's greatly appreciated. One issue that I know we've tackled in multiple our meetings is after hours and weekend transportation. I know here in Kansas, especially in the rural areas, if they have transportation at all, a lot of transportation, they shut down at like 5 or 6 o'clock, and then on the weekends there's just nothing that's available. Is that an issue that you've come across in Vermont and other national issues? And
yes, thank you for mentioning that, because yes, it is an issue. It's an issue across the country. One of the things that potentially is being explored, well, I won't even say we're at the point of exploration. It's been talked about. I've had a discussion with one of the consultants that works with our Vermont Agency of Transportation. We have a pilot project going on in the Capitol right now for microtransit in a rural area. And it's really the first time it's been tried in a fairly rural area. And we've gone through the first year. We started it a year ago, January, right in the middle of the pandemic. In some ways, I think that was helpful. In some ways, not. I mean, we're learning, some things we probably should have done differently. But so far, it's been very successful. It replaced 3 existing routes, 2 of which were fairly heavily used. One of them, especially during the legislative session, because it ran from the state capitol to the various state offices around the capitol. And then there was another one that just circulated around the city of Montpelier. Had some usage, not a lot of usage. what microtransit has done is really made a more equitable situation there, because now it covers the entire Montpelier area and a little bit of a corridor to the next town, which is called Berlin, which is where the hospital for the area is, and a lot of healthcare providers are up there. So it's sort of this square area with a little corridor, rectangular attachment, and it's working fairly well. I've used it quite a bit. And if you're not familiar with microtransit, basically it's an on-demand service. And the way to think about it is it's kind of like a public transit Uber. You use an app or you call on the phone and book a ride, and that ride, comes to your door, and you've told it where you want to go, so off you go. There may be other people on the bus and they get dropped off on the way, and then you can book your ride back. So to answer Christina's question, one of the things that came up is, as we explore putting this in other areas, the thought is that rather than removing some of the public transit buses that are working well in those areas, is to make the microtransit sort of an adjunct to extend those service hours into the evening, potentially the weekend. So it's really sort of right now on the sort of the thinking stage, but we'll see. I mean, we have good data right now that this particular project's been successful. And it's been a joint project with the transit provider, the Agency of Transportation. And I think one of the things that has helped make it successful is a Montpelier-based group, which had nothing to do with disability per se. It's called Sustainable Montpelier Coalition. And they just saw the need for, if you look at a map, or fly over the city of Montpelier, the vast amount of real estate is parking lots, and they really wanted to figure out a way to make Montpelier more sustainable and not just building more parking. And so this is one of the ways this microtransit came about. And one of the first principles that was done when that was being planned, and I think this was critical also in helping make it successful, is do no harm, meaning make sure it doesn't impact anybody who's currently using public transit, that it doesn't negatively impact them in any way. And I think for the most part, that's been very true. The reason I say the most part, one of the things with microtransit is you have to do at least a minimal amount of planning. You can't just go to a bus stop and when the bus goes by, it's going to stop and pick you up. If you're in a microtransit setup, typically, I mean, they're set up in different ways all across the country. So there may be some that are organized a little bit differently, but for ours here, you have to have a reservation. So that means you have to actually call and book that app. You can't just walk out your door and down the street to the bus stop and know that, in 20 minutes or half an hour or whatever the time schedule is, a bus is going to show up and you can jump on. And that has actually affected some people. So that's unfortunate. So there's, like I said, we're learning. We just, from January started our second year of this 2-year pilot. So we're keeping tabs on it. If all goes really well, I'm going to try to submit a presentation for next year's, not this year, but next year's Nickel conference to talk about this. So any other thoughts?
Peter, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that sounds like a really good program, especially if being able to adjunct it to the current public transportation. If you wouldn't mind keeping us updated on that as well.
Sure.
Because I know that would be something that I think would really work here in Kansas, if we can get everybody talking and maybe try and implement something like that.
Sure.
Does anybody else have any thoughts, questions, any issues you want to run by with Peter that his expertise might, even just another mind to run around in, pick his brain a little bit?
Peter, I just have a quick question, just really out of curiosity regarding the autonomous vehicles. Has there been any talk about what liability issues would look like in the event that an autonomous vehicle malfunctioned, and who would be liable for any accidents?
There's been a little bit of talk about it. I don't think it's been explored really fully. I mean, it is a question that it definitely has come up. I suspect, although I don't know, currently the way things are set up, I mean, if there was an accident, just currently now is if you have two drivers in an accident, the police would respond. And so it would have to be determined whether there was some malfunction with the autonomous vehicle that caused the accident. And then probably whoever's running that autonomous vehicle would be liable, or, if the other driver was somehow at fault. There was Tesla, I mean, they don't have fully autonomous vehicles, but they do have vehicles that do allow drivers to, do a lot of things automatically. And there was a case where there was an accident with a Tesla vehicle, and this was clearly, I mean, I don't know how Tesla ultimately worked it out with the driver of the vehicle and Tesla, because the driver was using some of those autonomous features in an environment where they weren't supposed to. And so the question came up is, well, why doesn't Tesla disable those features when it's in that kind of an environment? And whether their technology wasn't, quite up to that speed yet, or, I'm not sure, but it's definitely an issue. It's something ultimately that, yeah, I'm sure will be sorted out, but there's nothing real definitive about it yet.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it.
Oh.
I had a comment about the Medicaid issue. Back in September, I had joint replacement on my knee, and I wasn't able to do 2 appointments in the same building with a Medicaid ride in the same day. They told me they either needed to be more than 7 hours apart or on separate days.
That's very interesting. I'm surprised because, obviously, if there's 7 hours apart or separate days, they're paying for another full, route, travel, back and forth from where you are to the doctor's office, the hospital, where, in Vermont, I know the transit providers work very hard to try to get, and they've even worked with hospitals and especially dialysis centers to really try to schedule people when other kinds of trips aren't as busy. And that's, been somewhat successful. There have been issues. One of our dialysis center is running 2 shifts. So, people get out of dialysis at 10 o'clock. And this is, again, the after hours issue, but these are Medicaid rides. So we have had some success at getting those. But yeah, that really doesn't make much sense to me. It would be cheaper for Medicaid, especially, I can see it would be a scheduling issue if you said, you're going to do one and 3 hours later another one, so you wanted to go home in between. But if you schedule them,
that was part of the point. Is I didn't know that they wouldn't bring me home in between, so I didn't pack a lunch.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, I hadn't heard of that. But I will check because it hasn't come up here, but you know, it may. I mean, I know they try to put them, have people schedule things back to back, so it's easier. So if there's a big space in between, yeah, I can see where that might be an issue. But yeah, I'll check on what that is in Vermont. I don't know. Thanks for asking that.
No problem.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that helpful for me to know, because like I said, that hasn't come up for me in Vermont, but so it's good information for me to know. So, you know, if somebody's trying to, you know, make an appointment and make more than one appointment, I can tell them, well, you need to do it this way so that Medicaid would pay for it. So I appreciate that. I do a lot, I mean, especially because Vermont is so rural. Well, I don't do a lot, but people know that if they have an odd situation where they need to get a person from point A to point B, that, you know, I'm kind of their guy to call. This is several years ago, but there was a person at the VA hospital, which is sort of in the central part of the state, a little south central. And they needed to go to Burlington, which is in the Northwest. And I never did understand why they couldn't have access to veterans transportation, but for whatever reason they couldn't, and they needed wheelchair access. And so again, this is going, and this wasn't Medicaid, and this is going halfway across the state. So how do you do this? And a lot of it is just really knowing all the different transportation things in your state. So what we worked out was the local transit provider could get that person from the VA hospital to the Greyhound bus station, which was close by. And the Greyhound bus station went from there, which is a place called White River Junction, to the Burlington airport. It no longer actually stops in the city of Burlington. Those are, you know, changes there, but and so we were able to have the individuals who was meeting this person and getting them home to Burlington. They said that would work. They could get them from the airport and get them home. So we made sure that, you know, they made the Greyhound reservation enough in advance to make sure that it was wheelchair accessible vehicle. I mean, they're all supposed to be now, but you want to be sure. And that worked, but it was like, you know, putting different modes together to get a person from one place to the other.
Thank you for your input on that, Suzanne, and letting us know that happened, because yeah, you never know when issues like that pop up, and it may be happening in other areas. And
yeah.
Thank you for your input, Peter, on that. Does anybody else have any other questions, comments, any other situations that, you know, you've been dealing with in your areas you want to run by Peter? Okay, there is one thing, and I don't know if it's something that you've ever dealt with, Peter, but I know in our area, because we're so close to the state line, that a lot of our customers have the issue that even though the doctor that they're going to see is within, I think it's within a 50-mile radius here in Kansas, it's actually across state lines. Like the doctor's over in Missouri, and so they're like, a lot of times they have to fight with Medicaid about that, because they're seeing a doctor that's across state lines, whether it be because it's the closest doctor that can help them with their issues, or, you know, I know here in Pittsburgh, we have our own hospital, and they're like, well, why don't you go there? And it's because the doctor I need to see is over at that hospital. So I don't know is that something that you've ever had somebody come to you and say, hey, this is an issue, or that you've worked with?
No, that's another one I haven't worked with. I mean, again, I think part of it is because Vermont is so rural. One of the major hospitals in the state is in New Hampshire, Dartmouth, which is part of Dartmouth College. And you know, and so that's routinely, you know, providers go there because it is a major hospital hub for people, even in Vermont. I mean, my primary care physician is there as well. I'm trying to think. I know and I don't know if the rules have changed over the last few years, because I do know that, and this would be more for specialty stuff, and I'm pretty sure, but again, it's something I will check on, that Medicaid in Vermont, that Medicaid has paid for somebody to go from Vermont to Boston, which is certainly crossing state lines, because that's where they needed to go. That was really the only place that could provide them with the care that they needed. So I think a lot of it is sometimes just really good advocacy. We have here in Vermont, through Vermont Legal Aid, it's called Vermont Health Access, and they help people advocate for you know, access to healthcare. So I don't know if you might have something comparable in Kansas or not.
Okay, that's good to know, and that's definitely gives us something else to look into. Does anybody else have any other questions, thoughts, comments for Peter?
Just to say thanks for the information. It's all interesting, and look forward to hearing more about the stuff that's going on.
Oh, you're very welcome. And just to not give you a completely skewed view that I can answer get transportation for people that need to go everywhere. We do get calls from time to time that somebody needs transportation to go, even if it's in state, or, you know, to go to a family funeral. And, you know, other than telling them to seek out churches, or, you know, borrowing money from friends or family, or, you know, the usual kinds of, where can I scrape together a little bit of money for this person? I have no answers for that one. So there are still some things that are problematic, because those are important things for people to be able to do.
Definitely. Yeah, we get a lot of those calls too. And unfortunately, you know, wish we can say, oh yeah, here, you know, here's what you need to do. But yeah, unfortunately it hasn't, transportation and things haven't, you know, made it that far yet.
Right.
But if no one else has any other questions or anything for Peter, I will just conclude Peter's part of our meeting and say thank you very much for your input and meeting with us today and sharing some of your experiences. It was really good to hear from you. To move on for our agenda for the day, I know we touched base on the evening and weekend, but does anybody have any updates on that, as far as like any ideas that you've come across or any input that you think might benefit with that across the state of Kansas?
I have not.
Okay. I think that's one we'll just have to continue to work with our local CTD groups and talk to legislators, other agencies that deal with transportation. Just keep, you know, contacting and networking anybody that you think might be able to help. And then just a reminder, you know, the letter and a conversation starter has been posted on our website, our SPIL Trans website. And we also do have, like I said, our Facebook page, Twitter, YouTube page that Greg set up. So use those resources, especially, you know, those resources that Greg put up on the website of other transportation contacts and different things like that. I'd like to open it up to any other discussions of any transportation topics you guys want to talk about, any issues that have come up recently, or that you've been continuing to battle that you might think the group might benefit from hearing about and maybe have some ideas to help. Anybody have anything going on? Okay. So let's see, for our next meeting, which will be July 12th at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. As of right now, we don't have a speaker lined up. Does anybody have any ideas as far as someone they might want to hear from, or
I know that there is a new mobility manager that's been hired. I can reach out to Michelle to see if that person would be interested in presenting.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be good. Good to hear from them. Do you know where they're stationed at, or like what area of the state that they cover?
I don't. I'd have to look up on their website and find that out. But he's brand new, and so probably brings a unique and fresh perspective. So
okay. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind reaching out to them and see if maybe they'd
Sure.
like to join us for the next meeting. And if anybody else can think of anybody that they might want to hear from, whether it be mobility managers, from transportation providers, even local CTD members or anything like that, that can talk about kind of what they're dealing with and what's going on, and anything like that, just send us an email, let us know, and we can go that route. And I believe that's pretty much it that we've had today, unless anybody has any other comments, any other questions for Peter, for us as a group. I'm gonna say,
Christina, can
you're cutting out just a little bit, Diana.
okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Okay. I know that SPIL employees is going to be going to the caucus, but did you see that Luann sent us an email the other day about if we wanted a presentation at the caucus? You know, we'd done that once before, I think before you got on there. I don't know anything about it, how much it cost or anything. The housing got somebody paid our deal for, it wasn't for the caucus, it's for the housing.
The housing SPIL group.
Yeah, the housing SPIL group, but I didn't know if we was interested in trying to do the presentation at the caucus in August, because we just got till the 15th, which is Friday, to put in, but I don't know anything about how much it cost or anything like that, if anybody was interested.
Yeah, that might be some. I'll look back and see if I missed that email from Luann. I don't know if it's because I didn't get it or if it just got lost in all my other emails, but I'll look for that, and I'll send it out to the group to see if anybody's interested. Thank you for that, Diana. Do we have any other questions, comments, ideas about what's going on statewide? All right. Just a reminder, like I said, our next meeting will be Tuesday, July 12th at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. We'll make sure to get out the agenda and the link quite ahead of time, so everybody can have that. And then hopefully we'll have a speaker lined up, and it'll be good to hear from someone, a new face to the transportation side of it. So with that, if nobody has any other questions or anything, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Peter.
Nice to meet everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, you're
See you
welcome.
guys
Thank
later.
Peter. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.